welcome to the dialogue today on Christian worldview and the NFTs and Metaverse. Now, I know that this is a very, very much on-trend topic, and by the end of 2021, it was already reported that the size of the NFT market had reached an approximate somewhat of $41 billion in value. So we're looking at a very huge number here. But to some, it has also been compared to the dot-com bubble, where speculation-fueled investment flooded the market then. Now, before you write off NFTs, which stand for non-fungible tokens, by the way, we could revisit David Letterman speaking to Bill Gates back then in 1995. And David Letterman at the time poked fun at Bill Gates, and he mocked people who were excited about the internet at that time. And he even said, when he talked about the internet's ability to broadcast a baseball game, Letterman smiled and asked Bill Gates at the time, he said, "Does radio ring a bell?" Now, Christians especially did not really begin to think seriously about the internet or its successor, the social media, until well after they were very much adopted at a very popular level. And churches did not also prepare their congregations for probably the promises or the pitfalls of the web. So a lot of times Christians have found themselves caught up in a cultural tide, lacking discernment in how to manage with wisdom and how to engage the new trends. Now, the internet, as we all know, can be a very powerful discipleship tool, but without a serious understanding of technology and its ethical and theological implications, Christians are likely to be what we call in Ephesians 4 verse 14, blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. So with this, I think it makes sense, and we should avoid past errors and start asking questions relating to NFTs and the Metaverse, especially to understand how we as Christians should think about them and what should the Christian worldview be in relation to these. And so with me, we have Broderick Sim and Max Jeganathan. So Broderick is the founder of MissionDao, which is the world's first fully transparent and decentralized mission fund. He is an NFT fund manager and a Web3 consultant. Through the MissionDao NFT art sales, Broderick and his team aims to fund both traditional and digital missions, while also empowering other kingdom-minded artists and businesses. He regularly shares the gospel and is a lover of books written in the 1800s. He is also an avid coffee drinker. I guess you can ask him a little bit more about the 1800s books. Max is an international speaker and a director of Thinking Faith. He is passionate about helping people make sense of current issues and life's big questions through the lens of the Christian message. A former lawyer and political and policy advisor in the Australian National Parliament, Max is currently undertaking a PhD in law. He lives in Singapore with his family, loves movies, watching basketball with friends, and playing with his kids. So now I'm going to hand the time to Broderick, who's going to give us a quick overview of NFTs and the Metaverse before going to Max.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's my honor, it's my privilege, humbled to be here today to share just a little bit. I'm going to hand the time over to Max very quickly, but just want to give some definition for NFTs as well as Metaverse. Right. So let's talk about NFTs. NFTs is non-fungible token, NFT. So non-fungible. The big question is, what is fungibility? What is actually fungible? So the word fungible actually means interchangeable or exchangeable. So for example, a dollar, if you have a dollar bill, that is fungible because it's interchangeable. You can exchange it for another dollar. It is of the same value. A Bitcoin is the same. You have one Bitcoin will be equal to one Bitcoin. One Ethereum will be equal to one Ethereum. But a non-fungible token, it's something a little bit different because there's no two identical product. It's very similar to watches. For example, I'm wearing this watch. It's made in the year 2000. If you have another watch that looks exactly the same as my watch and is made in the year 2000 from the same manufacturer, from the same factory, it will be worth very different. The worth will be a little bit different. Why? Because my watch has been damaged, right? I've knocked it around and the quality and the condition of it, it's a little bit different from yours. And you could have a perfectly new one, it would be worth a lot more. Our watches, they're not fungible. Sneakers are not fungible. Houses are not fungible. So an NFT is a non-fungible token, meaning it's a digital asset. It's a digital asset that is not exchangeable. So a digital asset that is unique and not exchangeable. So NFT, hopefully that makes sense. And the second thing is the Metaverse. The Metaverse is a huge word, right? Facebook sold us the idea of like this world that we could live in and we could exist in it virtually. But the Metaverse have existed long before Facebook. The word metaverse comes from two words, meta and verse. The word meta actually means beyond. So metaverse actually means a universe that is beyond our universe. So what does that mean? Our mobile phone, social media, it is a metaverse. We could live in our WhatsApp group. We could never meet anybody and have a community, have relationship, build connection over Discord. And when I was growing up, I played this game, right? And this game is called Maple Story. I think some of y'all might be familiar with it. You might have your own version of MMORPG, right? It might be World of Warcraft. It might be Final Fantasy. If you are much younger, it could be Roblox. It could be Fortnite. These are metaverses. We live vicariously through them. We live vicariously through our avatar. We find value, meaning, purpose, community in this universe that's beyond our own universe. So the metaverse, simply put, is a universe that's beyond our own. I hope that helps.
That's great. First of all, thank you for having us here. Broderick and I are really pleased and blessed to be part of this. Thank you for that warm welcome and intro, Evangeline. It's always a pleasure to partner with you and Sherman and the Gatekeepers. So thank you for all of that. I'm just going to speak for about 15 minutes or so and then hand it back to Broderick, who's going to speak a bit more. Then we're going to have some Q&A, as was said. Albert Einstein, there's a story told about him, a famous story. When he was on a train travelling from one city in regional Germany to another, he was quite old at this point, and it's not that he was getting forgetful, he was still obviously brilliant, but he was a bit fickle-minded, and he had lost his ticket. And so he was like crawling around looking for the ticket while the train conductor was walking up and down just checking tickets and punching them. This is, back in the day when tickets were punched by someone that conducted the train. And they all knew who he was, so they weren't really interested or worried in checking his ticket. And they told him this, and yet when the conductor walked by an hour later, Einstein was still on the floor of this train looking and couldn't find his ticket and looked very irate and stressed. And he said, "Professor Einstein, it's okay. We know who you are. We know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. You don't need a ticket. We know who you are." And Einstein smiled and looked at this young man and said, "Son, you might know who I am, but I don't know where I'm going." And the interesting thing about that is that it raises, I think, some of the questions around the first principles that face all of us as we step into this stage of this round of this digital revolution. So we're talking about the metaverse, we're talking about blockchain technology, we're talking about NFTs and cryptocurrency. And really what this represents is probably the fourth or fifth round of the Industrial Revolution. It really depends on when you started counting. The way I take it when I look through history is that ever since we invented the printing press, there's another round of the Industrial Revolution every 4 or 5 generations. And this is the fourth or fifth or sixth one of those. And Einstein's point is important because all too often we as humankind, we just kind of drift into the next stage of history without critically and thoughtfully reflecting on first principles. And so Einstein's story is important because too often we don't take time to think about who we are and where we are going. All we are preoccupied with is what we can do. What we can do and how we can live is what preoccupies most of the great minds in humankind all through history, rather than who we are and where we're going. And so what I want to reflect with you for a little bit tonight is some of the questions and the first principles around those questions. Who are we as humanity? Where are we going? And how does that play into the virtualization of reality, the metaverse, the emergence and explosion of NFTs, and how this is all going to play out? Because what I want to put to you, and I think the Bible verse that Evangeline used is perfect for this, if we don't reflect on the first principle questions, if we don't take time to think individually and collectively about who we are and where we're going, we will wind up being in what I'm going to call cultural drift. The Bible calls it being blown here and there. It's really just being taken downstream of whatever modern culture is doing. Now, that's not always bad, but there's usually always some risks and some problems with it. Think about a fish swimming downstream. They think that they're just going with the flow, but when you think about it, they're not really exercising any kind of agency or freedom or autonomy or sophistication. Even a dead fish can swim downstream. And Aldous Huxley, the great English writer, he summarized this well. He predicted many years ago that industrial advanced economies will drift and dance and dream their way into oblivion. That's what he said. He said they're not going to be marched there through a war or through some revolution. He said they're going to be so distracted that they're going to just dance and dream their way into oblivion. And the word oblivion is an interesting one because it literally translates to being unconscious, uncaring, or unaware of reality. Unconscious, uncaring, or unaware of reality. So I think it's important that we think about how virtual reality relates to actual reality and to think about some of those first principles so we can avoid this cultural drift. And I want to talk about it in the context of 3 first principles, right? The importance of morality, the importance of trust, and the importance of purpose. The importance of morality, the importance of trust, and the importance of purpose. First of all, the importance of morality. Now, for each of these 3 things, there is a prevailing cultural assumption or a prevailing cultural message. And it's not always entirely wrong. In fact, sometimes it's quite helpful and it's right, but it's always at least incomplete. It's always at least incomplete. And so what I'm going to suggest to you, I'm going to set down what the cultural norm is. If we do nothing, if we just swim downstream and don't think about it, we don't have events like this, we don't take time to critically reflect where will that take us? And then I'm going to suggest what I believe needs to happen in order to correct that, to the degree that it needs a course correction, to the degree that it needs a complete change of trajectory, to the degree that it needs complementing, supplementing, adding to, right? So first of all, the importance of morality. Now, the thing with the advancing technologies and incredible technologies, including what we're talking about tonight, is that people often just assume that they will make us better people, that the advance of technology will just make us better. It's funny, there's another quote from Einstein when he said, "It's become appallingly obvious that our technology has surpassed our humanity." He's talking again about first principles. And the biggest mistake we could make is that we can stop thinking about the big moral questions and just embrace technology without understanding the reality that we will take moral assumptions and moral frameworks into the metaverse. We will take moral assumptions and moral frameworks deep into the 21st century and beyond. When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and any of you here or watching online who studied economics or commerce or an MBA or just really likes to read, hey, I think this might be in Broderick's category of books from a couple of 100 years ago. The Wealth of Nations really was one of the seminal works, not the only one, that set down the principles of free markets. And so Adam Smith, and I'm paraphrasing and oversimplifying here, but basically he wrote this incredible work saying, hey, there's this great thing coming, guys, that we've come up with, a bunch of us. It's called free markets. And it's how we make sure that land, labour and capital are most efficiently and productively deployed and utilised for the betterment of humankind, for the improving of our quality of life. And in large part, he was right. We now live in a global market economy, and enormous amounts of wealth have been generated to lift literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and improve all of our qualities of life. The interesting thing is, when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is what is studied in all the MBA curricula all over the world, from INSEAD to Harvard to Princeton to Yale to NUS, I'm sure, he also wrote another book, another work, called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, where he made this point. He said, the free market, like any other technology or idea or conception, is amoral. It doesn't have moral content in it. It's just a system. It's just another technology. We have to bring the moral content to it. And there is a need for moral clarity, moral truth, and moral discourse in order for this new technology, back then the free market, to work well and for the flourishing of humankind. Adam Smith understood this way back then. And that's an important, it might be a very simple first principle, but it's important for all of us to remember, right? As this wave of positive energy around the virtualization of reality takes over, to remember that the metaverse, or just like NFTs or blockchain tech or cryptocurrency, they are not intrinsically good or bad morally. They are amoral. They're amoral constructs, amoral systems. And so just like an internal combustion engine, they have the capacity to do good and they have the capacity to do great evil. But all internal combustion engines, just like all examples of technology, from the steak knife through to the computer, through to the metaverse, they all need moral petrol to be pumped through the engine. And so we can't just stumble forward without thinking about the deep moral questions. And I'm talking about first principles of morality, principles like assumptions that we sometimes just take for granted, that all people are created equal, that we all have intrinsic dignity, that we all have intrinsic value, that we all have the rights to freedom, to the freedoms of speech and thought and conscience, and all of these sorts of things. These are moral first principles that we need to take into the metaverse, into the virtualization of reality. So in that sense, digital technologies are just another type of technology. They're amoral, and all amoral systems, all amoral technologies cry out for moral context. That's the first thing. There needs to be a process of thinking and a commitment to thinking about the importance of moral content and where we're going to get these moral frameworks from. Secondly, the importance of trust. Now, this is an interesting one because one of the wonderful things about particularly NFTs and blockchain technology, as Broderick's going to go into a little bit, is the shared ledger, is the robustness and the incorruptibility of this shared ledger, where things like corruption and bribery and hacking and so forth, at least up until now, and seemingly, as people claim it to be, it's not corruptible. So there's no way of rorting the system. There's no way of cooking the books. Right? And so that's one of the great benefits of blockchain technology that we are being told, and from the little I know, with good reason, I think, with good reason. It's a very high trust environment. It's a very high accountability environment is what we are being told. Here's the interesting thing though. It is, no questions asked, a high accountability environment. But there's a big difference between accountability and trust. When we think about the accountability assurances that blockchain tech actually gives us, what it actually does is it mitigates against the lack of trust that's out there in society. It doesn't actually increase trust. It increases accountability beautifully. And that's a really good thing. And we need to embrace that because accountability is good. But what it doesn't do is increase intrinsic trust. We can only trust because there is enough accountability there. If anything, it points to the fact that no one trusts anyone. No one trusts anyone anymore. That's why we need this technology. It's almost humankind acknowledging that we are intrinsically untrustworthy. We are intrinsically broken. And so the data is already showing that. Some of the research is already showing some of the things that we just need to be careful of going forward. We can't assume that this technology means suddenly we're all completely trustworthy. If anything, the technology acknowledges that we're not trustworthy. And the data shows it. We know that the average CV on LinkedIn has 3 lies in it, which is statistically higher than the average CV in hard copy that is handed over to a potential employer. We also know, from the studies at least, that 20% of all representations on social media about individuals making representations about their own lives are false, are false. And that goes in the online dating world all the way through to the social media channels as well, 20%. But here's the interesting stat. Here's the interesting stat that just came out in the Financial Times last week. When people are asked, how many people out there do you think are being completely honest on social media? The answer was 2%. So our perception of other people and their trustworthiness online when they're in the virtual world is rock bottom. Most of the people, most of the time, assume that most of the other people are lying online. Now, that doesn't mean people don't lie in the real world. We know there's plenty of that. But what we have to remember about the virtualization of reality is when we step into virtual worlds, it's the same people. It's the same untrustworthy, broken people, just like you and me. So we need to be aware of that and remember that the cultural narrative, the prevailing cultural narrative that this all provides perfect trust is actually incorrect. It provides perfect accountability, perhaps, or very good accountability. The trust is up to us. And it goes back to the moral frameworks I was talking about. So what are we in need of? In the context of the importance of morality, I've talked about how we are in need of a clear moral framework, the intrinsic dignity of people and how people should be treated. In the context of the importance of trust, we are in need of a fresh call to integrity and to the building of authentic relationships of trust, both inside and outside the metaverse, inside and outside the digital world. The authentic building of relationships based on trust and the integrity of people. Because when we look at the teleology of people, when we look at the Harvard longitudinal study that tried to find a statistical correlate that led to human flourishing, the closest thing they could find was the strength and authenticity of relationships. So we know from the science, not from the Bible said it 2,000 years earlier, the science is now working it out, that human beings are built for relationship. And we have to remember that over this next 100 years or so. Human beings are not built for accountability. They're not built for virtualization. Those things are not intrinsically bad, but fundamentally we are built for relationship. So there needs to be a redoubling of our focus on integrity and our commitment to continuing to build authentic relationships of trust. And I'm encouraged about how that's going to be possible in the virtual world and in the digital realm, and how NFTs and the metaverse and cryptocurrency and blockchain tech can fuel and augment and strengthen all of those things. But we still have to be clear on these first principles. So the importance of morality, the importance of trust, thirdly and finally, the importance of purpose. And here's where the word technology needs to be looked at very carefully. So the word technology, which emanates from the etymology techne, basically means to make or to do, to make and do, right? That's technology. And it gets back to the Einstein story where we can get so focused on it that we forget who we are and we think more about what we're doing and what we're making. When we think about purpose, the purpose of the free market economy that we've created, of all our technologies, both digital and non-digital, can be boiled down arguably to two things: improving personal experience and achieving and optimizing utility. It's all about experience and utility. And that is most of the reporting at the moment, particularly by people who are not subject matter experts in this space, are really canvassing that. They're talking about how this can affect our lives, can improve our lives, about the kinds of experiences that we can have in virtual worlds, the kinds of money that we can generate, the kinds of problems that can be solved in our lives, whether it's healthcare or whether it's building communities online or whatever it might be, whether it's generating wealth, whether it's giving people access to each other when they wouldn't have had it. It's all about improving personal experience. The other thing it's about is optimizing utility, because utility is how people make money. There's a great line from I think it was the New York Times last month by a unicorn tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, and he said, the business model is very simple these days if you want to build a unicorn. You just have to build a product, a network, a process, or a program that can build networks of meaningful utility between powerful people. He said that's the easiest way to get rich today, meaningful utility. And it's interesting that he used that word utility, because it's all about optimizing outcomes. It's all about shareholder value. It's all about profits. It's all about the bottom line, if you like. And that's just the world that has been created, for better or worse. As I said earlier, lots of great wealth has been generated that's done a lot of good. But it's interesting that we focus, the cultural drift is taking us to a place of focusing entirely on personal experience and utility. Now, I want to be really clear on this. I think the enhancement of personal experience in our lives and utility is a really important thing. I think both of those things are good. But I think we can add to that. I think there is something we can augment this purpose with. And I want to talk about two things: truth and service. Truth and service can be very unsexy and boring words, particularly in the context of investors where private equity flows and in the context of writing articles and getting published. Everything's about personal experience and utility. But truth and service are deeply, deeply intrinsic to human flourishing. And I think this new wave of digital technologies can be wonderful for the common pursuit of truth, for discussing and discoursing over different worldviews, for reaching people with worldviews may not have been able to be reached, for people all over the world in places where they might struggle for food and water, but they have internet access and they can engage online and learn more and ask more questions. So I think the equalization of the information flow globally is a wonderful thing that will really feed the importance of seeking truth. And then secondly, and even more importantly, you might say in a practical sense, is service. How can we use digital technologies? How can we use the metaverse to serve other people and to alleviate the suffering of other people? So personal experience and utility for me, that's a good thing, but it's very inward facing. It needs to be complemented by an outward facing parallel, seeking to alleviate the suffering of other people. How can we deal with things like discrimination and inequality using digital technology, using the metaverse, using NFTs? How can we empower the downtrodden, the oppressed, the marginalized, the ostracized? So in all three things, when we consider the importance of morality, trust, and purpose, we see that there are incredible opportunities waiting in the digital space, especially in the context of the virtualization of reality and the democratization of things like finance and property and digital assets. But to all of them, we need to bring a sense of, yes, enthusiasm, but also caution and thought and reflection, and I think sophisticated vision, if you like, that gets back to some of these first principles. We need to bring to our search for morality in the metaverse a coherent moral framework. We need to bring to our search for trust a renewed call to integrity and commitment to building authentic relationships of trust. And we need to bring to the admirable purposes of improving personal experience and utility also an outward-facing purpose to serve others, to help others, and to alleviate the suffering of others, and to optimize the search and the seeking of truth, both individually and community. There's a great line that Harry Potter fans will know that Dumbledore says at one point in the series, where he says, the time is soon coming where we have to choose between what is easy and what is right. And these first principles are about a company going along with the incredible technological breakthroughs, but remembering that there are first principles that have to come along with us. And what I put to you, just in closing, is that the Christian message and the Christian moral framework offers a response to all of these things. It offers a coherent moral framework that all people are made in God's image and should be loved and taken care of and put before ourselves. It offers that call to integrity and to trust and to building authentic relationships. The whole Christian message is anchored in relationship, loving relationship with God and loving relationship between God's people. And thirdly and finally, in terms of finding a basis for calling people to truth and to service and sacrifice and alleviating suffering, that's exactly the Christian ethic of love. It's postured outwards, not inwards to my experience, but outwards to the suffering of others. So the Christian message uniquely explains the challenges and also responds to the challenges through which we can all engage with digital technology, engage with this new wave of the digital revolution in a positive way. Thanks for listening. I'll hand it over to Broderick.
Awesome. Thank you, Max, with the mic.
Thanks, man.
Hello, everyone. My name is Broderick, the founder of MissionDao. MissionDao is a transparent and decentralized mission giving fund. It's built on the blockchain. Transparent because it's on the blockchain. Decentralized because we operate as a DAO. A little bit more on that later. We exist to alleviate human suffering, very much like what Max said, and to advance the kingdom of God on earth and in the Metaverse as well. The Metaverse is a fascinating place. I think I spoke a little bit about the Metaverse just now. The word meta means beyond. Metaverse means the universe that's beyond our own. Right? We all kind of exist in our little metaverse, whether it's our WhatsApp group, our Telegram group, our Facebook group. We exist in those spaces. For the younger people who play games, right? You would exist in your metaverse, whether it is with World of Warcraft, League of Legends, Fortnite, Valorant. I'm speaking about the games that my wife plays, right? You will exist in those spaces. And when I was younger, I played this game called MapleStory. And I think a few of y'all here will nod and say, yes, I know what MapleStory is. But what was really interesting that I was sharing with Max just now was that I would live my life in my school and, I'll finish school at 1 o'clock. I'll go home and then at 8 p.m. I will turn on the computer, right? I'll turn on the computer, I'll jump into MapleStory, and I will spend hours on MapleStory till it's like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and I'll go to sleep and wake up next day, 7 o'clock. I live vicariously through my avatar, right? I live vicariously through my character. And my real world value when I go back to school is determined actually by what I did last night, by what I contributed last night. And I'll get flamed if I didn't show up for a party. I'll get flamed if I didn't do my job as a party member. The higher level I go, the more valuable I am in the real society. So that was the metaverse that I grew up in when I was younger. Of course, that metaverse eventually kind of died off. What Facebook and what these other big tech DeFi companies are saying is that there's going to be a new metaverse that will be coming up, right? We do not know what it is yet. Could it be Horizon World? Could it be Decentraland, Sandbox? We have no idea, right? But right now, we do not have one. Right now, we're still figuring out what is the metaverse, very much like in the earlier days of social media, we were trying to figure out what is the social media. We have MySpace, Facebook, Friendster. Of course, now we have one dominant winner, which is clearly Facebook. Right? So similarly for the metaverse, we're still finding that space. I want to talk a little bit about NFTs, right? Because the NFT market right now is a market that's ripe with opportunity. We see so much trading volume every single day. People are making millions and millions and millions. It's a $40 billion industry. And it's only growing. It is a space that's filled with opportunity, but with that also filled with the full expression of the human condition. In this space, you find greed, manifested in a very, very drastic manner. You find anger, you find anxiety, you find depression, you find pride. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that is the metaverse that we exist in when it comes to the NFT space, is this space called Discord. Right? Discord is like your Facebook group, like your WhatsApp group, but on steroids, right? It's really, really intense. People are talking on it 24/7. If I turn on my phone right now, I could show it to you that people are chatting right now and they are talking non-stop. Right? They're connecting. This is the universe that they are living in right now. They live to connect with one another, to talk about this project, to get whitelisted for this project, to buy this project or to sell this project. They are constantly talking. And in that space, you find greed. In that space, you find pride. I'm going to share an example, okay? Because this is my experience. I have been a practitioner for a while. I trade NFT, I curate NFT for the fund that I work for. And being in this space actually really, really challenged me. Because I'm a church boy, right? I grew up in church, served in church, worked in church my whole life. And stepping out into this space is suddenly difficult, it's suddenly challenging. Because I would trade something and I will make money, right? I will make 5 times or 10 times my initial capital. And I'll go to sleep that night and thinking, oh man, if I would have sold just a little bit later, I would have made 20 times of what I made today. That is greed, right? That is greed. And I have to go to the Lord. I have to go to the Lord and say, Lord, I don't like the person that I'm becoming because I am so greedy. This is not enough. Making 2 times is not enough. Making 3 times is not enough because I'm watching someone else. I'm watching my friend and he's making a windfall. He made 20 times. And I look at that and I'm like, Lord, why is it that this guy can make so much money when I'm here and I only make 2x? That is greed, and that is incredibly ugly. And I have to go to the Lord and I have to say, Lord, this is not the man that you want me to be, right? You made me a man who is generous and who is gracious and who is grateful and thankful, not someone who is comparing all the time, not someone who is thinking about how do I maximize profit? How do I get more money? Why is that guy making more money than me? That's not the person that the Lord wants me to be. I have to go to the Lord and say, Jesus, make me more like you. Jesus, make me more like you. And I could share a story with you. Recently, I launched a project and it's incredibly successful. It sold out in 15 seconds, all right? $7 million, 15 seconds. It's incredibly successful. But before that, I was doing collaboration, talking about partnership. Suddenly, someone texted me, I have no idea who this person is. It's a random person, got my number, texted me, say, hey, bro, there's this thing I'm working on. Would you want to do a collaboration with me? I got on the phone with him and I was a shark. I was like, tell me about a project, tell me who you are, tell me what you have done before, tell me your background, tell me your team, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, what's your roadmap. And I grilled that guy and I belittled him and I made him feel small because I was puffed up in pride. Because I was the guy who have made it. And that is the tiny little project that want to collaborate with me. Do not waste my time. And that is pride. The moment I put down the phone, I'm like, Lord, what have I become? What have I become? Who is this monster who is so filled with pride, who is so puffed up that he have no time for the little guy? Have he forgotten who he is? Have he forgotten who he was, where he came from? I have to go to the Lord and say, Lord, this pride in me is disgusting. Lord, change me. I want to look like you, Lord. I don't want to look like everybody else in the world. I don't want to be conformed to the world, but I want to be transformed into your image. This space is filled with pride, avarice, greed, lust, anger. And it tempts the human soul and it tempts the Christian and it draws the Christian to say that, why don't you become like one of us? Because this is how all of us operate here. That is the danger in that space. That is the danger of the NFT space. As a believer stepping into the space, as a trader stepping into the space, we need to be aware of these things. We need to be aware of this pitfall. And we need to go to the Lord and we need to say, God, change me. I do not want to be like the world. I'm sent here to be light in the darkness, not to be one of them, but to bring your light, your peace, your joy, and your grace into this space. And that is the thing that we as Christians, as believers, when we step into this new industry with this so many opportunities, as we step into this space, this is something that we need to walk with the Lord. We need to take this journey with the Lord. With that said, the NFT space is filled with also anxiety and depression. People get scammed every day. In fact, I got scammed 2 weeks ago, right? And I've gotten scammed, I don't know, countless times because I was too hasty. Right? People get scammed all the time. In the last 5 days, I witnessed 3 rug pulls, meaning that 3 companies decide to siphon out money. One of them siphoned out 7 million, the other one siphoned out 10, the other one siphoned out 20 million. And people lose a lot of money because they invested in this product, this NFT, and they got rug pulled and they got scammed. So this space is filled with people who are struggling with depression because they just lost a lot of money. They're struggling with anxiety because they could have made more, but they sold too early. Or they sold too late and they didn't make a profit and they start losing money. This place is filled with people with depression and anxiety, and this is an opportunity for believers. This is a right opportunity. We can go in right now, today. That's a practical step right now. We can go in today, go into a Discord channel and start talking to people who are struggling, and they will talk to us. And that's the place where we say, hey, tell me about, this thing that happened to you. Are you struggling? Are you okay? Let's talk about it. Let's process it. Let's process this. And you get to speak into their life. And you get to preach the gospel to them. You get to love them. You get to love people who are struggling because they are already there. And there are a lot of people who are suffering in the NFT Discord space. This is an opportunity for us Christians to send missionaries, digital missionaries, into these spaces to love these people who are broken and struggling. And I think we should have more Christians stepping into the space, being mindful and willing to love on people. This afternoon, I was just hanging out with a pastor, and that is exactly what he's doing. He goes into these spaces just to love people, just to find someone who is hurting, someone who just got scammed, someone who is suffering from anxiety, and just to speak to them one-on-one, just to minister to them, just to love them, just to encourage them, just to get onto a call with them, just to, pour the love of Christ into them. And that is something that Christians can do today. A place that's filled with sin and darkness is filled with sin and darkness because the light of God have not penetrated it. And we get that opportunity, We get the opportunity to step in and to love people. And that is the NFT space. That's the opportunity in the NFT space. And if you would allow me one more moment, one last thing, right? I want to talk about how we can leverage the technology. The metaverse that Facebook sold us, right, is the metaverse that is experienced using VR, right? Virtual reality. Put on the goggles, you enter into a new dimension, you live in this 3D environment, you interact with people in this 3D environment. This technology exists. It really exists. Oculus is going to cost you $500. It's a little bit more expensive than my phone. It's just $500. Anybody here, could afford Oculus. One of the dreams that I have, one of the things that I want to do with MissionDao after we raise the fund is to create an experience in VR. So just imagine this with me. You put on the VR goggles and it's totally dark, and you hear the narrator say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And right before your very eyes, as if you're there, you see the world being formed and created, as if you're standing there with God. And the creation story happened before you, and you see Adam and Eve. Imagine what this could do for children's church and youth ministry when you take that goggles and you put it into the young person's eyes and he's on Noah's Ark. That's pretty cool, right? Imagine the young person standing in FS Domain, and on his left is David, on his right is Goliath. And you watch that verbal exchange and then that rock fly and Goliath falling right before your face. That is something that's totally achievable today with VR. And it gets even better. Imagine you're on a camel and your VR goggles is kind of like, what's going on? You look down, you're on a camel, you look right, you see the Magi's. And you look up, you see the stars. And the Magi's are saying, hey, there is one that is born, the King of the Jews. And you're journeying with the Magi's. And you arrive at the nativity scene. And it gets even better. Imagine walking with Jesus as he does ministry. Imagine watching Jesus being so kind to the woman at the well. Watching Jesus heal and touch the leper. Watching Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. She was thrown before him in the temple, and Jesus said, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. And when you look around, you see the people start to walk away, and the stone starts to drop. And then Jesus said to the woman, woman, where are those who accuse you? Where are those who condemn you? And the woman would say, no one, Lord. And Jesus would say, go and sin no more. You look around, there's nobody around but Jesus and the woman. And imagine walking with Jesus down the Via Dolorosa and standing at the foot of the cross and watching him die on the cross. Imagine what that would do to the hearts and the mind of a young person experiencing the gospel for the first time. Now with this VR technology, we take these goggles and we send it all around the world, to Jordan and to India and to, Japan and Korea. And when they plug it in, they will hear in their native language, in Korean or Bahasa or Tagalog, the language that they grew up with and the gospel preached to them with that language. That is something that we can do today with VR. All we need is to get a team together, build the story, write the story. The story is already there in the Bible, right? But pull out the story, craft the narrative, craft the visual, and get that film done, and that will change the way that we experience the gospel. This is just new technology. We can leverage on it to preach the gospel. the NFT market, the metaverse in the NFT right now is filled with darkness, a ripe opportunity for us to go in and preach the gospel. That is the two things that we can do today. And with that, I conclude my talk. And thank you for listening. Appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Evangeline? Awesome.
Great. Wow. That was a very, very fascinating perspective from both each of Max and Broderick, one giving a much more high level and philosophical perspective to the NFTs and the metaverse question, and Broderick bringing a very practical application to it. Now we've got a few questions coming through, and I think one of the things that I think runs across obviously both the sharing is that the big difference obviously between the metaverse and the physical world is that of the actual embodiment aspect, right, where you actually have the physical interaction with people. And I guess one of the things that perhaps may be interesting for people to understand is how do we live our lives differently in the metaverse as a Christian? And do you see that being different in the metaverse from a relational perspective, especially when we are conducting ourselves? And also, I guess a lot of times we're portraying a certain identity online as well. You could be an avatar of sorts, right, in the metaverse. So how do we navigate these identity questions and also the relational questions, physical world and in the metaverse? Maybe Max can start with that, and then Broderick can bring about. I mean, you've obviously got practical application on that.
Yeah, I'm sure Broderick will add some practical stuff. I guess, again, in principle, it's a really important question because this is one of the things that neither of us talked about, but I'm really glad has come up because we're talking about this question touches on this thing called the virtualization of communication, right? Or the virtualization of relationality. And it's one of the big sticking points that critics will use when they are trying to attack or detract from or sound warning signs about the metaverse. But I think I come at this from a slightly different angle. Brod and I were actually just chatting about this earlier tonight. The virtualization of communication has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands in fact. And I was trying to track it back to when it actually started, and it probably started around the time the first person wrote a letter to someone else. Right? So until then, for X thousand years, humankind was just in face-to-face communication, and then someone wrote a letter, and at that point, we made a shift. We made a shift from direct face-to-face real-time communication to a virtual form of communication. And then that obviously was then augmented and strengthened and taken to other levels by the telegraph, the telephone, fax machines, eventually the internet, email, and now various social media applications, and now into the metaverse too. So I don't think this is a huge systemic shift. I think it's just another stage along the spectrum of virtualizing communication. And just like with anything else, I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. I think we need to be nuanced about it, that it's not all bad and it's not all good. It offers great opportunities to connect and communicate with people that we otherwise would not be able to connect and communicate with. But it also offers the risk of diluting and devaluing relationships that we already have with people, that we perhaps don't put the effort in to go and meet them, to hug them, to see their faces, because we just can't be bothered and it's easier to do it virtually or online. And we have those tensions already with Zoom meetings and so forth. So for me, the answer, at least in principle, is about making sure that the virtualization of communication doesn't become a replacement for embodied physical communication, but it becomes a catalyst and a strengthener for it, that it's like a layer on top. So we take the good and we avoid the bads and mitigate against that. Just a few thoughts.
Yeah, anyway, Paul, used to write letters, but he also did talk about how he was estranged from people, right? So there was some disembodiment at that point in time. He said, I wish that you were here and things like that as well.
Exactly. And so I think that that's an important point, Evangeline, because Paul wrote letters, and in the letters he said to many of them, I long to be with you. He never went to people and said, I long to leave you and write a letter. So there is a hierarchy, at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that personal, embodied communication is of a particular level of dynamism and authenticity that is ideal, but it's not always possible. And for that, the virtual world is a wonderful asset.
Yep. To add to that, I think it's not always a bad thing, right? It's not always a bad thing that someone wants to live through their avatars and want to be anonymous, because when they are anonymous, they're more willing to share their issues, they're more willing to share their struggle, they're more willing to be real and be quote unquote themselves. And I know of I was attending a conference recently, It's how do you build a metaverse church and all that. And the pastor there was saying that he connected with someone from France, and they could not communicate because of the language barrier. But because of the underlying technology of that metaverse, they're able to communicate, and it's a good thing, right? They could communicate, and they start having really deep and intimate, talks and like vulnerable conversation because there was a boundary. There is a limitation, absolutely, totally agree, but there's also an opportunity for us to love people who want to remain anonymous and who will never ever show up in a meeting, never ever show up in a Zoom, never ever show up in a church, but will show up and in your metaverse gathering as an avatar. That might be our only opportunity to love them. That might be our only opportunity to connect with them, and that could be a first step towards something that is more real, genuine, and authentic.
Thank you. And I mean, perhaps, and also there's another question in relation to the tension, because I guess, going back to Max's point where we talked about how there have been, we can't really view this as a either or, it's a spectrum in terms of the embodiment and the disembodiment, because I guess, if we look at the Bible, it does value the concept of embodiment. I mean, God created the world. There's physical creation of the physical world, right? And obviously, in a way that the metaverse does not really appreciate in that sense. In fact, it's an idealized, immaterial kind of a world, right? So I guess in a way the Bible actually rejects that. So maybe the question then should also be asked as to whether you think Christians should participate in the metaverse world. I get it that in Paul's time we already had some form of disembodiment, but do you see that that runs counter to the Bible biblical values in that sense?
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I totally agree with that. I think we need to be in the metaverse for the same reason that Christians need to be going into brothels and mosques and prisons and main streets and restaurants and unreached places. The key is that when we go there, we do it Christianly. I think that is the key. Yeah, we definitely have to be there.
Yeah, and I think as time go on, we will find that the largest unreached people group will exist within the metaverse. Because we have a whole generation of young people who are growing up who do not care about church, who do not care about religion, who do not care about Christianity, and more of them are migrating into this digital space. They're migrating into this metaverse space. So more than the needs in other nations, perhaps in a few years, 5, 10, 20 years, the largest unreached people group will exist in this space. So I believe that Christians should step in, and I believe that we should go in and love people.
Thank you. That was, totally agree with that. I mean, Broderick, you talked a little bit about how, young people are also looking at church differently now, right? And how do you think the metaverse, would change our concept of how church is done?
Wow, I'm a traditionalist, so I would rather meet people in person. So when Sherman told me that this is a real life meeting, I'm like, yes, sign me up right now, right? Because watching something on YouTube, watching something on Zoom cannot be compared with something that is real. Imagine sitting in a place and worshiping alone on your couch. It's very different from, sitting in a church or standing in a church and worshiping with the saints. I think there are some things in Christianity that's just irreplaceable. Face-to-face community. We can try with the metaverse, but there's just something about that is different. Jesus would reach out and touch the leper. Jesus would reach out and touch people, when he could just use his words. Jesus could just send the word and the leper could have been healed from a distance, but he chose to come near and he chose to touch. There's something about touch. There's something about, doing it in real life. With that said, there is still an unreached people group in the metaverse that we need to step into, but ideally we would want to eventually meet them in person. Ideally, we would like to meet them and give them a hug, show them the love of Christ through physical touch. And I think it's a difficult thing, but I'm still kind of traditional in that sense.
Yeah, this is the multi-million-dollar question, right? About whether virtual churches are churches and how do we engage online and all of that. And I agree in principle with everything Broderick shared. I would just add that, that word ecclesia for church in the Greek it does mean to gather together. You can interpret that literally in a physical sense, or you could make an argument, which I don't entirely agree with, that a virtual gathering is still a gathering. But I think Broderick is right. I think any plain reading of Scripture makes it very clear that the physical embodiment of community and relationality is a pretty important part of what the New Testament talks about as church. That doesn't mean it's exhaustive or exclusive in the context of Christian mission, Christian gathering, Christian outreach, and the outpouring of Christian love. I'm totally of the view that the Holy Spirit can work virtually. He can work over Zoom meetings, he can work with online gatherings, but there is something to the fullness of the flourishing of God's community in the way that he has designed it that is most ideally manifested in a physical gathering, when you're laying hands on each other, when you can see and read the body language of people in the bodies that God created them with, not the virtual bodies that we give ourselves in the metaverse, in the bodies that we're actually created with. And even just the physiological, psychological, spiritual and emotional benefits and importance of things like physical hugs and handshakes. The non-Christian data on this is very, very clear and non-negotiable. So I think provided that digital engagement and online gatherings do not replace or displace physical gatherings, I think the degree to which they can, like I've already said, catalyse it, add to it, make it better. And most importantly, I think, and this is key for me as an apologist, Broderick has touched on this, through it, when we can reach people that otherwise wouldn't be able to be reached, that is gold. That is amazing. And that we see Paul doing, we see the apostles doing it in the book of Acts. Paul in Acts 17, he goes to Athens, he goes to the Jewish synagogue to reach the Jews, he goes to the marketplace to reach the marketplace folks, and then he goes to the university to reach the academics and the philosophers. And none of them would have come to the other places. He had to go to all three of them. So I think that is very key in how we can reach people that otherwise wouldn't have been reached. What's not going to be okay is when Christians say, well, I don't need to leave the house anymore to go to church, I can just do everything. That is a displacement and a replacement, not an augmenting.
Thanks, Max. And Broderick, I think that's really, really bang on and observation-wise. I can't imagine, I suppose, people these days, they could literally drive themselves into a virtual church because of the fact that, it's almost like consumerism at play, right? You could literally pick and choose whichever church, so-called virtual church you want to go to. And I can't really imagine, I'm not sure yet, about VR baptisms for that matter. You don't even need water, right? It's just literally put on your goggles and you're baptized. I'm not sure about that either, but something to think about, right? If we're talking about the metaverse. I'm going to just move on to a slightly different part about the DAOs, because I think, Broderick, you shared a little bit about that. And there are some questions relating to DAOs here. And I suppose you're in that space. What is some of the, advice you can give to people who are interested in, linking up with these DAOs, as well as are there any black sheep that we should look out for among the DAOs?
Oh, wow. A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, meaning that in a decentralized way, meaning that power is distributed to different people, different holders of the token. Autonomous meaning having its own law. So the law is kind of like set in. So even though it is a decentralized autonomous organization, it's decentralized in the way that it governs. It's still centralized in its vision. So for example, let's talk about BeatsDAO, right? BETS, BeatsDAO. BeatsDAO exists to purchase digital music. So that is their centralized vision. If you believe in that, if you want to get into that, sure, go for BeatsDAO, right? If you want to try, virtual city planning, then get into Decentraland, because Decentraland is a city planning DAO. The amount of money that you spend might not might be a tiny, tiny fraction of votes that you actually have. You could never really make a difference. The centralized vision for Decentraland is to build a great city. So I don't know if there is a black sheep. I know that there are many people claiming to be a DAO, claiming to do something. But I think as long as you believe in a centralized vision, for example, MissionDao, what is our centralized vision? We want to advance the kingdom of God on earth and in the metaverse. Then you should come and join us in MissionDao, because that's exactly what we're doing. And the way that we're spending our money will just kind of align with this vision. And if it does not align with this vision, then that's something we're not going to do. So I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yes, that is helpful, I think, Rod. Just to add to it, I think, just in relating it back to something I said about moral content, I think you're spot on. The answer lies in the question of what is the purpose of the DAO, right? And the reason decentralized appeals is because we're going through a generation that hates the word submission and hates the word authority, right? So this is an anti-authority, anti-submission culture that we are in. So decentralization, by definition, is a good thing. But when we talk about purpose, purpose is an inherently moral word. So purpose, when any DAO decides on what its central purpose is, it's decided that this purpose is good and the diametrically opposed purpose is bad. And so we just have to remember that there's always moral content, even in DAOs. And it's decentralized moral content in this sense, but it's still moral content. It's just disparately distributed amongst everyone that's involved, right? So the moral vision and the purpose and the teleological trajectory of the DAO is still determined by people. It's just determined by in a more democratic sense. The power is not concentrated. But a bunch of bad people, in control of the DAO collectively can still do bad things to other people. So there's always moral content. There's always, that's always going to be there. There's always a moral layer that underpins everything. And I think DAOs are a fantastically innovative way to at least mitigate against human brokenness. So you don't give all the power to one or two or three people, but it just kind of, diverts that or divulges it to a number of people instead of one or two.
Yeah, to add to that, you spoke about trust just now. You talk about how, with the recent innovation and all that, it actually shows that we do not trust each other.
Right.
And DAO is what we call a trustless organization, meaning that we don't trust anybody, so we're going to trust everybody.
Yeah, you don't need trust.
We don't need trust because you could see every vote. You could see everything is transparent. So there's no way I could lie to you. There's no way I could cozen, embezzle money, or I could make decision that is only for my profit because everybody can see everything. This is a trustless system. It's a good and a bad thing, right? It's a good and a bad thing. Yeah.
Maybe just to ask a question here. I mean, I guess for not everyone, would have the same kind of background or understanding of DAOs and the dangers that exist out there. Are there DAOs, when you talk about purposes, that as parents or as Christian leaders that should be aware of? For example, the temple DAO, one of those things which may seem sexy to some, to a generation, but then may have its inherent dangers. And the temple is one of those. But if we could learn a little bit more, what are the dangers out there? It would be helpful, I think.
When you buy into a DAO, you buy into their centralized vision. So I think you brought up Temple DAO. So Temple DAO is new age, right? This new age DAO. They exist I have no idea why they exist, to be very honest, right? Maybe they exist to make money. It could be something, right? They could exist to make money. And the method that they're using is they're manifesting and they're, chanting and they're doing all this new age, quote unquote, satanic, demonic stuff. So as Christian believers, those are things that we do want to avoid. With NFT projects, there are NFT projects that's outwardly satanic, right? There are NFT projects that is outwardly demonic. So those are things that we do want to look out for as well. So I think it is project by project. So kind of looking out for these spaces and being aware that let's not get into something that is demonic. Let's not get into something that is just, they exist for a purpose that we don't align with. So it goes back to purpose. Yeah. I hope that helps. Some clarity. Just NFT projects in general, be mindful. Where are they going? What is the roadmap? What are they trying to achieve? Are they able to achieve it? Or is this a soft route? Are they on their way to scam your money? Are they able to deliver what they promise? Does their value align with you? Does the team make sense? So there are a lot of guidelines and consideration before you invest. When I say invest, I mean your time and your resources into a project, whether it's a DAO or it's not a DAO.
So picking up on that point that you just mentioned about investing, right, in the space, I think there are some concerns, I guess, by lots of people that obviously, the market is quite frothy, right? We see a lot of inflationary prices. Also, there isn't really a fundamental price discovery mechanism, right, that to go by in valuing these NFTs. How should one navigate this space? And to some extent, I think these could be ethical considerations as well, because some people just go in for that quick buck, right? And then the next day, I think the price just falls. So how should we kind of approach this, and what are these ethical considerations that we should be looking at?
X, you want to go first?
And then you definitely have to go.
I will go.
Please mop it up. So I think you kind of nailed it with the end of the question, Evangeline, where I think motivation is the first and most important thing. And that applies, to anything, to our jobs, to if we're buying and selling stock, to if we're buying very low risk, low yield assets in other spheres of economic activity. If we're doing it from a place of greed and the heart posture is one of greed, then that is a problem for us, and we need to check ourselves. I think the challenge in this space is because it's so volatile, you can make a lot of money very, very quickly. And so greed is, as Broderick shared when he was speaking, it's facilitated more, encouraged more. It's an environment, it's a psychological, social and economic environment where greed is fostered and kind of nudged along a little bit. So I think that is one thing. The other point I would make, and then Broderick will give you some financial advice, is that I don't think there is an issue with synthetic value or intrinsic value for these things. So the critics often will say, oh, there's no intrinsic value, like there's no intrinsic value behind the asset. But if we think philosophically and not economically, there's no intrinsic value behind any asset, whether it's gold or a Microsoft share or a phone. The only reason that thing has value in a monetary sense is because of the principles of supply, demand, and scarcity. It's only because people agree that gold is worth something and it's relatively scarce combined that it has this value. If everyone woke up tomorrow and agreed that gold was useless, then it wouldn't matter how much people had. It would be valueless. So these NFTs and everything in the digital space are just as synthetic in their value and as speculative in their prices as anything else in the world. The point I'm trying to make is that the world is intrinsically volatile and the world has no intrinsic value. All monetary value in anything on the planet is synthetic and it's imputed in an extrinsic way by other people, which is why it's really important that we go back to first principles that go beyond the physical and economic world. A human being has intrinsic value. Why? Because it has value that is imputed from a transcendent space, from a different realm. God imputes us with intrinsic value because we are made in his image. That's intrinsic value. Value in the world is extrinsic. It's like Monopoly. In the game of Monopoly, the money is worth something because everyone in the game agrees that it's worth something. So it is with NFTs, so it is with cheeseburgers, so it is with Microsoft and Google shares. It's only because we all agree. We've built systems that agree to this price. So I think that's the first point. We can get past this debate about intrinsic worth and intrinsic value. None of it has intrinsic value, but nothing in the world does. Even cash itself doesn't. It's only because the Monetary Authority of Singapore says that it has value. It's imputed from within the system. It's extrinsic. So yeah, just to start on that. And I think, Broderick, you'll speak to the volatility and what to actually do with your money. I think the principle is don't take your kids' college fund and throw it all in there, right?
Yes, this is financial advice. Usually people say it's not financial advice. This is financial advice. Yeah, MAS actually released a guideline recently, and MAS says this. They say MAS would like to remind consumer that investment in digital tokens, including NFTs, are not suitable for retail investors, right? And for NFT in particular, their perceived uniqueness combined with speculative demand have served to inflate prices. So what MAS is saying is that the investment of NFT looking for capital returns is not for retail investors. If you require a lot of research, understanding the market, understanding the hustle, understanding the team, understanding a lot of things, hours and hours and hours and hours of research to actually make money in the NFT space. So it's very easy to watch somebody like me or like someone else who posts on Instagram. Right? I've stopped doing that because it's bad influence, right? Someone on Instagram or posting something. Oh, I bought this at 1 Ethereum and now it's 20 Ethereum. And this guy, he's 20 years old now, millionaire. It's so easy to watch all these things, right? And say that, oh, that's easy. Trading NFT is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. And it's not for retail investors. And I'll say leave the investing to the professionals. And if you would like to step into the NFT space, I would say use money that you could lose. Use money that you want to lose. Only invest with money you want to lose. Because you're buying into a culture, it's like you're buying sneakers. That sneakers can go to nothing. You're buying watches. That watch can go to nothing. So it's very, very similar, especially when things are non-fungible. You're buying art that can be of value today and no value tomorrow. Because the market size is so small. It's incredibly volatile and not recommended for retail investors.
And just to add very quickly to that, as an economist, there is a difference between intrinsic value and intrinsic utility, where I think the virtual space can potentially be quite high risk. So we know that, in Decentraland and other metaverses now, you can buy land from $10,000 US all the way up to 2.6 million, I think. They sold a plot of land at Fantasy Island in Decentraland or in Sandbox recently. There's no more intrinsic value in that than there is in my phone or a cheeseburger, like I said. But there is a lack of intrinsic utility. If you buy a house, a real house in the world, and its price crashes because it actually has no intrinsic value, you can still go live in the house. But if you do that in a virtual world and the price crashes, you can't go live in there. You buy food in the virtual world. If you lose everything else, you can't go and eat it, right? So there is intrinsic utility, and we need to be practical and remember that this reality is virtual. It's not actual reality. I think that's worth thinking about too.
Very well said. And I think, there are questions. We have very young adults in our midst as well and online. And I think some of them have asked questions regarding, if you are fresh out of school and you do want to kind of start investing in the crypto space, right? Not just NFTs, I guess. Any advice you would give to them?
I would say do 1,000 hours of research. Like read a lot, watch a lot of videos, watch video at 1.5 times speed, get into as many NFT community as possible, make fake trades in a sense that make a mental trade, make a paper trade on your paper to say that I bought this thing at this price, I'm going to sell it at this price and see if your predictions happen. So it is like investing in stocks or any other asset class actually. A lot of research must be put into it before you step into it. And if you step into it, expect to lose money, right? Expect to make money, expect to lose money. It is incredibly volatile. I would say research is the most important thing. Spend thousands of hours doing research, reading, and don't stop reading. Don't stop talking to people about it. And try it out with money that you want to lose. NFT is super fascinating if you're not going in to get capital gain. Right? If you're going to get capital gain, it is incredibly difficult. But if you're not going in for capital gain, it is actually incredibly fun. Right? So let's talk about MissionDao for a while. This is a little bit of a self-shield, right? What happened in MissionDao is that we are selling a piece of art, and we sell the art, the money goes into our mission giving fund and it goes out. So when you buy a MissionDao NFT art token, you are actually giving. You're not actually buying anything, you're actually giving to the mission organizations that we are partnering with. You're actually giving to the advancement of the kingdom of God in the Metaverse. But what you get in return is a cool piece of art. And that's really exciting. You have the right to display it, meaning that you could print it out, put it up in your home if you really like that art. With that, you get access into this governance to vote and propose on matters, which can be quite interesting and quite fun for someone who's just kind of like starting out and trying out with DAOs. Another use case would be for events and ticketing. Recently, Coachella, the music festival, decided to sell their tickets as NFT. And it's quite interesting because if you buy the Coachella NFT, you have a ticket for Coachella for the rest of your life. As long as Coachella is around, you could just use the NFT as your entry ticket and it's a VIP ticket. And that's pretty fun. We could do that for conferences. Recently, I did something called a pop-app. So a pop-app is a proof of attendance protocol. It's also an NFT and it's free. It's free to mint. And I really enjoy this. And I think it's something that churches could utilize. Youth ministry and children's ministry could utilize this. When I was growing up in church, we would go to church and we would get a little sticker or a stamp for attending church. Right? And we would start collecting these stickers and stamps. And at the end of the year, during the Christmas carnival, we could take our stickers and stamps and we could go and exchange it for a soft toy. We could exchange it for a Bible. We could exchange it for books, board games, or even a Game Boy. Right? So this incentivized me as a child to go to church. Right? And it's not the purest motivation, but as a child, I'm looking forward to go to church every Sunday because I get this sticker. Youth ministry could actually use Pop-Ad, and you could distribute Pop-Ad. Every time you come for a service, you scan, you get this little icon, this little NFT, and it's the sermon theme or something, And you could click that and you could watch the sermon again. You could read the sermon notes, or you could see the photos that's taken on that day. It serves as a memorabilia. So this Pop-Ad would be pretty cool. I think, if you could do that, it'd be pretty fun. It's definitely something that I would recommend churches to do. And maybe at the end of the year, they could show off, hey, look, I have attended church for the last 52 Sundays. And, I really like this weekend because the pastor was preaching about this, and I can go back and listen to that sermon again. So that is a use case, and it's incredibly fun. I think there are a lot more that we can explore. Makes you something to say?
Yeah, I think those use cases are all fantastic. And so I just wanted to summarize, in principle, what Brod is sharing is that if the posture is about improving the quality of life and serving others rather than improving the level of your bank account, then the use cases and the virtue of it and the actual tangible benefits are there. There's this term NETU, non-economic tangible utility. That's what he's talking about, the quality of building communities online, of creatives getting together and collaborating, of reaching people that otherwise couldn't be reached, of enhancing actual experiences like a Coachella or youth ministry. That all works, but the paradigm has to be about improving the quality of life, not the quality of our bank accounts.
Yeah, the technology is actually quite fascinating, and it's really the possibility is limitless, right? This is what I thought about. This is what I think could work. But I'm sure that if you hear more about the use case and you do more research, you could find further utility than what I just mentioned. And I'm absolutely sure, just looking at the possibilities, you could create something that would be incredibly meaningful using the underlying technology. And it could be free. It could be really, really cheap. Just don't use Ethereum. Use something else. It's $1, maybe $10 at worst.
Thanks for that. I think one last question, and I think that relates also to the fact that, there are parents also in the room and online, and I guess the questions that they have had is also, how do they guide children, right, or youths or their young adults in kind of steering in this NFTs and Metaverse space, and what sort of advice would you give to parents as and educators as well in the space?
Just very quickly, in light of time constraints, there's that beautiful verse in the very first psalm that talks about being a tree planted by vibrant streams of water. And I think that is the key. We have to root ourselves and our children by a life-giving stream of water. And we know that that is Jesus Christ, for those of us watching who are Christians. If you're not, that's what the Bible calls the most vibrant, life-giving stream. And once we are anchored, drawing our nourishment, drawing our sustenance, drawing our identity, drawing our fulfillment, drawing our purpose from our relationship with Christ, then all of the first principles that I've been talking about, all of the real-life examples that Broderick landed with, they all will just flow naturally. So the key is, for parents especially, what matters most is the kind of people your children are and the strength and authenticity of your relationship with them, not so much what they are doing. What they are doing is secondary. As a parent, I'm always far too preoccupied with what my kids are doing rather than the kind of people that our kids are. We need to focus. This is a season and a generation for character formation, where we focus more on our ontology, who we are, rather than what we are doing. What we are doing is a natural outflow of who we are. And I think that's why in Scripture, Paul calls it the fruit of the Spirit. Because what he's saying is, if we're orange trees, we're not going to grow mangoes. We're not going to do very well at growing mangoes. The only way for that to happen is to have a transformation, a supernatural transformation, which Broderick was touching on, where you are supernaturally transformed into a different kind of tree. And for that tree, growing mangoes is very natural because that's what mango trees do. They don't have to try to do it. So we want to raise the kinds of kids that are the kinds of people that are anchored in Christ, that are planted by the life-giving stream of the water that he gives, and then everything else will flow. So it's a very short and easy answer for a Christian apologist to give. Broderick will give you the technical expertise answer. But invest in your relationship with Jesus and invest in your relationship with your children and make sure they're investing in those same two categories of relationship. Relationship this way, and relationship with those around them. Everything else in the metaverse and all the other verses for that matter will flow naturally in the context of flourishing.
I don't think I need to add to that. That is really good. So whatever he said, I'm just going to repeat it. But really, I think your relationship with your child, that's the most important thing. And see this as an opportunity. Like what I said, accelerated. Everything is accelerated. Greed is suddenly accelerated in my heart. It's suddenly revealed. Pride is suddenly revealed. The same thing will happen to your child. And if they're not open to share with you when they're feeling this way, or they feel judged, or they feel condemned when they share with you that they got scammed and you react in an adverse manner, like, how can you get scammed? Why can't you be more careful? The moment we do this, we actually scare our kids away because they feel like, oh man, I'm ashamed now. I shouldn't tell my parent that I got scammed. I shouldn't tell my parent that I'm feeling these things because I know how my parents will react, and you will react badly. So parents, be patient, be kind, be gentle, and be patient, I think, and allow your kids to surface this thing, withhold your reaction to them, because it's very easy when they tell you, I just lost one Ethereum, it's $4,000 thing. I just lost one Ethereum. It's very easy to go, what? You just lost $4,000? rather like, okay, tell me more, how do you get scammed, and process it with them and don't react too quickly. I hope that helps. I'm not a parent, I'm a youth guy. That's what I do with the young people. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that was very helpful and extremely informative as well for, I think, the audience here and online. We'd really like to thank Broderick and Max for such wonderful perspectives. I think if anything at all, we do know that Christians are needed more than ever in the metaverse. We cannot dissociate from the metaverse, even though it's a virtual reality. But if anything at all, I do think that, there can also be human flourishing within the metaverse for the gospel of the kingdom. And the metaverse really, actually, if you think about it, ultimately points beyond itself to the transcendent King, right? Whose words actually made non-virtual reality a reality. And that's something that we should always bear in mind.